Do you have a top 5 list for 1970?
I do. I very much do.
Well, lay it on me, brother.
It's a little meager. I don't have quite the list that you have of the 70s.
But like I said, 1970 was not a great movie year, so I'm not surprised it's meager.
I do have a couple of honorable mentions I'll throw out there. I usually do this with the Rankin and Bass Christmas films, but Santa Claus is Coming to Town is on this list. I feel weird about like ranking it with the other movies, but it's definitely worth mentioning. It's a delight. I also have the 12 Chairs is an honorable mention for me this year, just because I've seen it, but it's been long before the Letterboxd era that I've seen it, so I don't have a star rating for it. I remember thinking it was kind of bad, but I hear a lot of people talking about that it's really good, so I'm not sure what to do with it. I need to rewatch it, I guess.
It is one of 2 Mel Brooks movies I haven't seen.
Okay, well, maybe we could do a bonus Never Did It just for us.
Yeah, sure. Well, we can do that, and then maybe a Mel Brooks ranking. Like, yeah, there's only 11
of them.
And I hate to say let's wait till he dies because I want him to live forever. But there's a remake of Spaceballs coming out, I think, or a sequel to Spaceballs coming out, so maybe we can do it around then.
Yeah, I think I think you're right. I think it's a sequel. Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, those are my 2 honorable mentions. My number 5 is the Disney film, The Aristocats. That's a fun one. We love Marie in this house. And then number 4 is Swimming Pool, or La Piscine, as we've discussed. Number 3, I have a documentary. I normally don't do this in my more recent list because I have enough to separate them, but for this list, it works. Number 3 is one of the best documentaries ever made, one of the most famous music documentaries ever made. It's Woodstock. I saw it on the big screen at the Traverse City Film Festival one year. Just an awesome experience, and it's just a really incredible documentary and one of the most famous pop culture events, music events ever. If you've never seen it, certainly worth watching once. My number 2 is The Phantom Tollbooth. Just a wonderful movie. One of my favorite books ever. The movie is great too. And then my number 1 is 5 Easy Pieces.
So not surprisingly, because it is, as you said, a meager year, or you called it a meager list. I'm going to call it a meager year. There is overlap on our lists. My number 5 is The Aristocats. I like this movie. It's funny. This used to be on my list of movies I started but never finished because I was so bored by the first 20 minutes. But when I went and did my full Disney Animated Studio rewatch, I sat through it. I'm like, oh, this is pretty fun. This is a pretty fun movie. It's also the most racist Disney movie of all time. There is a cat that plays piano with chopsticks and is an Asian cat. If you think that the Siamese cats thing in Lady and the Tramp is bad, you ain't seen nothing. It's worse. It's way worse than the Aristocats.
Yeah.
My number 4 is El Topo. So we did our big Dune podcast and we talked about Jodorowsky's Dune. Jodorowsky's breakout movie was something called El Topo, which is, I guess it's a Western in that the guy wears a cowboy hat, but it's an acid trip. It's like one of the weirdest movies I've ever seen. The plot doesn't hold together. It's very strange, but it's worth checking out. It's an interesting movie. I plopped down $4 to watch it. It wasn't streaming anywhere, and I was like, screw it, I gotta see this thing. People love The Holy Mountain, which is his biggest movie. I'm curious to watch that, but now a little bit nervous after being like, is it just gonna be like a longer version of El Topo? My number 3 is MASH. I talked about that earlier in this episode. For those who are just listening to the top 10 or the top 5, just to the ranking part of the episode, which some people do. This is Alan Arkin's not Alan Arkin. Oh my God. Alan Arkin is in the television show. Also, it's Alan Alda. I'm all over the place. I told you it's this early for me. I was up late. Sorry. This is Robert Altman's Vietnam War movie, starring Donald Sutherland as a surgeon who couldn't give a damn less. Mm-hmm. And I think this is probably my favorite Donald Sutherland performance in any movie. He's so good in this. But like I said, the reason it's on higher is the last 20 minutes are a football game, and it's stupid and it's boring. But everything leading up to that last 20 minutes is really fun. It's also like a crazy misogynist movie, but it's good. My number 2 is 5 Easy Pieces, which we talked about on this podcast a lot. Yeah, I think it's great. I think it's the second best movie of 1970. And I'm really happy that it was such a big part of ushering in this era that I love so much. And like you, I also love A Phantom Tollbooth. It's my favorite movie of 1970. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. It's one of the best animated movies ever made. Some of it's not animated, but come on. I mean, the vast majority of it is. It just has such an interesting way of talking about childhood boredom. I'd be so curious to see someone tackle this in like the iPad era of being a kid. I don't know if they'd be able to do it it'd be very hard to tackle it in a way or as expertly as Chuck Jones did. Now, Chuck Jones is well known for being one of the, pioneers behind the Looney Tunes, but his non-Looney Tunes stuff is is the stuff that like got him Oscars, right? For like, I think he's won the animated short Oscar at least twice.
Yeah, I think a couple of times.
He's a genius in this movie. He's genius, and it's based on a genius book.
Norton Juster.
No, and he lived to be... Oh, he just died recently.
Oh, damn.
Well, that's a shame. Well, it's not a shame. He was in his 90s. Yeah, just wonderful. I love the Phantom Tollbooth. Everyone should watch it. It was on... I actually watched it really recently because it was... I mean, I've seen it throughout my childhood. It was one of my favorite movies as a kid. But I watched it recently because it was on Netflix, and it held up completely. So that'll do it for 1970.